Katy Faust，我非常开心，欢迎您提前澳大利亚国家保守主义研究所播客。Katy Faust, welcome to the National Conservative Institute of Australia podcast.
哇，好高兴跟你讲话了，这真的是非常好，谢谢。
There we go. Yeah, I mentioned that. Well, first of all, to show off a bit, obviously, but it's. I thought it would be interesting before we get into the hard questions to just ask, how is it that a social commentator like you speaks Mandarin Chinese?
Oh, it's because I never thought I would be a social commentator. I never thought I'd be a Chinese speaker either. I went to college. I actually almost didn't go to college because I was like, I'm not smart enough to go to college. I really wasn't a great student, but I was in all the shows. I was in choir and stuff. So I thought, well, the only thing I can do is sing. So I went to a school that was known for its music program, a really great music program. But once I got there, I was like, oh, I don't sing like these people sing. I'm not a singer. I'm a performer. So I realized that I needed to find something else to do at this college. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I ended up just taking Chinese on a whim. Going, well, I need like 4 years of a language, but if you take Chinese or Japanese, it's only 3 semesters. I'm sorry, 4 semesters. I was like, it's only 3 semesters if I take Chinese. I'm like, well, just give it a try. I was like, I don't think these people are going to be able to teach me how to read that chicken scratch. There's no way. And then I ended up taking it for 3 semesters, taking it for 4, studying in Shanghai for a semester, becoming an Asian studies major, dual majoring in political science, and then getting a Fulbright scholarship to Taiwan. And so it's like it kind of was 10 years of my life. After that, I worked at a Chinese adoption agency. I'm like, I
Oh,
love it. And it's mainly because I love talking and I love people. And it's like, I'll do it in any language that I can. So
mm.
I love Chinese, 但是现在没有计划练习啦.
Oh,
So
well,
I
here's
just
the
don't,
opportunity now. Yeah, yeah.
yeah, my vocab is awful.
Oh no, I've heard you speak, and it's really good. And it's unusual, and I think it's just useful for people to see that aspect of your personality because it's you have. I think anyone who knows your background a little bit will know that you're raised by a lesbian couple, Mandarin speaking Chinese. So obviously the profile of knuckle dragging bigger is sort of to tie, right?
I
Yeah.
know,
So
totally backwards, uneducated, not exposed to the world of
there
people, and
there we go. Yeah, you tick all you tick all the boxes. Um, but let me get into the hard questions now. So you've been, involved in a lot of social policy issues over the last, well, I mean, at least what 20 years? You just say 15 years? Yeah.
probably
Um,
15, I've been hmm, no, maybe 13, I've been writing about it, but I've had my nonprofit since 2018.
yeah. Okay. Yeah. And you've been in Australia. I mean, you appeared on Q&A, which actually was a show which has now been disbanded. You may not be aware. So you've lasted longer than they have. But why have um, why have social conservatives lost so many battles over the last, well, let's say 15, 20 years?
It's because they allow the other side to identify the victim, and then the other side humanizes the victim, and the victim determines the policy. So, what the other side does on every major, especially social and cultural issue, is they have determined that adults who do not get what they want are victims. Whether you're talking about an unplanned pregnancy and the woman being the victim because she can't get an abortion, whether you're talking about an adult who really wished they could have transitioned to the opposite gender as a child and therefore they need to push puberty blockers on adolescents, or whether it is adults who want to be married or want to be mothers or fathers, even though they're in a non procreative relationship, they're the victims if they don't get what they want. And so, whoever identifies the victim, the victim determines the policy. So we have been very reactive on all of those topics when the
Mm,
answer is we need to be proactive on all of those topics. We need to properly identify the victims. Then we need to humanize the victims by allowing them to share their stories. We do need to become allies to those victims, but not to the wrong victims.
mm.
So we need to use personal story a lot more and then punch with data and research after that.
Yeah, it seems that they all seem to follow a similar trajectory. These debates, the issue comes from nowhere a little bit, and there's a sympathetic character with issues, and then there's research that piles in, and people provide nice, well produced media kind of advertisements or sometimes videos and the like, And then it always seems to come down at the end that the objections, reasonable objections, which people should find sort of not motivated by hate and the rest of it, are waved away, and it often comes down, in many cases, infuriatingly, to simply an argument of, look, just be kind, just be kind, and it's very hard to counter that. How do you counter that type of
Well,
emotional, vague?
yeah,
Yeah.
if the person that's suffering is the adult, then sure.
Mm,
If the person that's suffering is the child, why don't you be kind to the child? That's why I'm saying, like, you have got to capitalize on the narrative. You have to decide what the narrative is. Don't play by their rules, don't play into their hands. You have to decide what the narrative is, and the narrative is children have fundamental rights. They have rights to life, they have rights to their mother and father, and all adults, single, married, gay, straight, fertile, and infertile, must conform to those rights, otherwise children are victimized.
mm,
So, like, if you let them control the narrative, like I was on with, Josh Zepps, in Australia when I was there last week, and that hasn't been released yet, but he said something like, "If you had your way, according to your agenda, I'm not allowed to be a parent." And I said, You misunderstand. I'm not deciding that you can't be a parent. Your body and your choices are deciding that you can't be a parent. I'm not the problem here, right? It is the fact that you are in a non procreative relationship by choice. It is your body that is the bigot, not me. I'm simply operating from the perspective of children have specific rights that adults must conform to. So, like, don't play their game. They're like, you're not letting me have a family. No, like, don't play along with their rules. Properly identify who the victim is, advocate hard for them, and then, like, just take it out of the realm of, oh, it's so awful because you're preventing me from having what I want. No, I'm standing up for what children need.
yeah. How do you counter again the argument that I listened to an interview the other day with Miranda Devine, who I'm sure you know, and she interviewed Scott Bessent, who's the gay secretary of the Treasury in the US, and seems like a pretty decent, good guy.
And good
Um,
at his job.
and good at his job, yeah. And he is, well, married under US law, and he is, I believe, has teenage children. So I don't know them, but I do know people who have that situation, and it's not all doom and gloom, right? And so there would be people who say, "Look, Katie, in an ideal world, blah blah blah, but it doesn't always turn out so bad." What's the argument to be made there?
Well, the argument is it's not an ideal world, but there
Mm,
are fundamental concrete realities that you can either recognize, which leads to child protection and social flourishing, or you can ignore and it will lead to child victimization and social breakdown. So, on the whole, we know these things about children. Number one, their own mother and father are statistically the most likely to be connected to, invested in, and protective of them. And unrelated adults in 100% of scenarios and cases, in terms of different family structures, will increase the likelihood of abuse and neglect. Those are sociological truisms that have been so well established in the social science media that sociologists have a name for it. And it is called the Cinderella effect. It's the idea that an unrelated adult in the home, mother's boyfriend, mother's husband, father's girlfriend, father's wife that are not related to the child, statistically do not treat children the same way as they treat their own children. So that's number one. Biology matters when it comes to safety, connection, investment. Number two, a child's own mother and father are going to grant them something that children crave, which is their biological identity. It's very hard for kids to answer the question, who am I? If they can't answer the question, whose am I? And then
mm,
third, if a child's right to their mother and father is respected, they will always have the perfect gender balance in the home. They will have the maternal love and the paternal love, and those two things have a very distinct impact on children, their development, their language, their orientation towards the world, their attitude, their ability to develop empathy, their ability to look out into their future with adventure, to take appropriate risks. I mean, the mothers and fathers do different things on all of those different levels. So you can have a situation where Scott Bessent or Josh Zepps or Dave Rubin are raising curated, hand selected designer children because that's what they are. Otherwise, they would have gone to adopt. They didn't. They purchased eggs. They intentionally separated the children from their genetic mother, leading to identity issues. They severed the child from their birth mother, leading to increased problems with attachment. And they're raising the children in a intentionally motherless home, which is going to set the children back in terms of their development and probably lead them to the place where they experience mother hunger, where they hunger for the love of a woman because they're made for the love of the woman.
Mm.
So, can those children still go to school and get straight A's? They can. But there's no way statistically that the child is not going to suffer in some way as it relates to their development, their identity, or probably the safety and cohesion of their home. There's no statistical world where we're dealing with the nature of human beings where that can be true. It is true that some of those kids may not be abused and they may not be forsaken and they may not spiral into an identity crisis, but they
Mm.
are going to have additional hurdles to overcome. So sometimes children face those kinds of challenges because of tragedy, because they
Mm.
lose a mother or father to death, maybe because one parent was abusive, addictive, and they could not be with that father or that mother. That is not the case with Scott Bessent or with Josh Sepps or with Dave Rubin. They purposefully, intentionally created that kind of deficit and loss for children just
Mm.
because they wanted a family according to their romantic desires rather than the children's rights.
Yeah, it just seems I've read that the same social science data as you have on the Cinderella effect, and like you say, it's very well known, but we just seem like it's a world away before public health authorities in the United States or Australia put out nice glossy campaigns trying to highlight or raise awareness about that issue, right?
Well, yes, we would need a children's rights movement to do that.
Mm. Ah, there you go. I know someone. Hey, to what extent do you think that some of the social ills we experience are due to economic decline rather than breakdown in the, Judeo-Christian ethic?
I don't know if you can have a thriving liberal democracy with a robust, moral, free market
Mm.
and be completely secular and be separated from the Judeo-Christian roots of the tree. As Ayaan Hirsi Ali said about a year and a half ago at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference, she said, Western civilization is a cut flower and it's surviving in a vase, but you can't regenerate. There's no growth and there's no sustenance. If you cut the flower off from its roots, all it will do is look nice for a while, but it will fade and it will die. And that's where we are. So we do need to understand um, that there's no human rights, there's no genuine equality, there's no prosperity without understanding what I feel like the Judeo-Christian world has to offer is an accurate answer to the question, what does it mean to be human?
Mm.
Every major issue that we are dealing with today, especially in the social and cultural space, asks the question, what does it mean to be human? And evolutionary biologists don't have the right answer. Secular humanists don't have the right answer. Islamists don't have the right answer. The woke don't have the right answer.
Mm.
Only the Judeo-Christian worldview that has the right answer, that we are made in the image of God, male and female, He created them, that only God makes life and takes life. Because male and female are distinct, only they can create children, and therefore that union must be recognized and elevated above all other adult relationships. Um, we should not determine that somebody will die in some kind of medical assistance. We shouldn't determine that somebody should die in an abortion process. We shouldn't determine that somebody should die in an IVF grading process.
Mm.
Like, there's every major question that we are dealing with today in the cultural space would be perfectly answered and resolved. It wouldn't be easy on adults, but it would be a clear answer if we understood and believed the biblical truth that we're made in the image of God and that God has properly defined what it means to be human.
Mm. Yeah, I agree with a large part of that, but I have some additional kind of um, elements which I think are worth considering. Right? I mean, you're a nation studies major, and and conservatives often say that social institutions are in decline because of the decline of Judeo-Christian ethic, and yet in Asia, many non-Christian Asian countries have been able to resist some of the social changes that have swept the West longer than we have. So what explains that?
Well, I don't see them resisting the massive population bomb that's
Mm,
going off. China's birth rate is under 1%. South Korea's is 0.68. Japan's has been at point 0.9 for decades now.
mm.
I mean, they're not avoiding it.
Japan doesn't have gay marriage though, and most no Asian countries don't, but that's not the case in, say,
Right.
Western Europe, yeah.
Right. But there still are forces, secularizing forces, materialist forces that
Mm,
seem to be changing the way they approach marriage and family formation, at least. So they have resisted in some ways the marriage redefinition machine, but I'm not sure if they are, I don't know if we can say that they are thriving in the area of
mm.
family formation.
What about, the other argument that, and this goes back to economic decline, it's all very well giving a rousing speech at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship, and I was there the first year, about telling another story, better story, which they use incessantly. But, where you have economic decline, when the jobs go, the drugs come in, right? And
Mhm.
it's almost, and yes, history is not driven by purely materialistic factors, but it does kind of matter when there isn't a viable way, particularly for young people today, to have a reasonable prospect of owning a house in their 20s, right? That does make it harder for, you know men to be viable prospects for women and get married and stay together and the rest of it. And simply sometimes find that these sort of rousing speeches about pick yourselves up and clean your room and all the rest of it misdiagnose, or ignore too much some of those economic challenges.
Economic challenges are very real.
Mm,
I pity the kids that are getting married. Actually, I pity the ones that are in large cities and that don't have an option to leave. In the United States, there actually really are a lot of places that you can move to, especially if you work remotely, that are affordable and charming, and not too far from a city. But, I hear my friends in London, or I talk to my friends in Melbourne, or
mm,
connect with the young people in Sydney, and even the taxi drivers, they're like, the petrol. I I they're like, I can't afford to live here anymore."
mm.
Or I've never been able to afford to live here. My rent is crazy. It's a major, major concern, and there is an economic connection, but I don't think that it's the driving connection, especially as it relates to family formation. So there are a lot of countries that have tried to solve, for example, the population crisis by paying women to have babies. Like we've got a lot of the Scandinavian countries, Japan has tried this for a long time to incentivize increased fertility by saying that women don't have to pay taxes anymore, paying for free childcare, or just giving like massive child credits if you want to have more kids. And none of it has made a dent. None of it has made a dent. Maybe Hungary, but that is still to be determined. It might just be that the people that wanted to have 4 children are just having them faster. We don't know if it's actually going to change the total fertility rate altogether.
Mm.
I think the problem is the story that we tell about men and women and family and marriage and children, and especially the story we tell about motherhood. That there is such a power in what is our collective idea about the importance of marriage, about the importance of children, and about the status of motherhood. Because what most women are hearing today is that children really aren't that important. And you can put it off, even if you want to have children at some point, 30s, early 40s, no problem. I mean, like, get your degree, travel the world, find yourself, pay off your debt, buy a house. You can do all of that first. You don't need to prioritize marriage and children. And as we talked about at ARC this last time, there's like 50% of women who are going to get to age 35 and don't have children yet. Many of them never will. And 90% of them are going to regret it because you don't often know as a woman how much you want children until you are past your prime childbearing years. And then it might be too late. So a lot of it is we are telling the wrong story about what women want, what is going to make them happy, what is meaningful in life. We're telling them that getting a master's degree is more valuable than staying at home with a toddler. And unfortunately, that's a message that sounds really good in your 20s or early 30s. But by the time you're in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, it's revealed as a pretty meaningless and empty pathway. And it's one that a lot of women are going to end up regretting. So what's the solution? I think the only bright spot on the horizon is Israel. Israel, that is the only Western country that has a fertility rate that's above replacement rate. They've got close to 3 children per woman, and it's not just the highly religious Jews, it's the secular Jews too, and it seems to be because Israel has a national story that elevates and celebrates motherhood, not just women as a part of the workforce.
Yeah. Again, one of the objections to, that I had at ARC was that they this pitch that's given to, don't you understand? It's important to, keep the national story going and get together and have kids and the rest of it. The pitch That's a pitch which is to sort of to the well-heeled audience in a way. And so when you have those stats about, I think it's 50% of of children in London who grow up in the age of 18, who don't have a mother and father under the same roof, which is ridiculous for a supposedly developed, advanced capital city of the kind of world. But literally, that first arc that I was at, the 100 meters down, or whatever, a couple of miles down the road in the city of London, there were guys chanting "Death to Israel, death to the Jews." Um, and I don't know whether nice John Anderson or interesting Jordan Peterson telling those guys to sort of like believe in our civilization, our national story, is really going to make a kind of dent. And I don't, some of the drivers and the changes. I mean, we had overnight, I think, this New York uh, primary, Zoran Mandami, right?
Mhm.
Who's been here in the United States for 7 years. I mean, him being elected, is that because people don't have gone too woke, or is it because it's a changing demographic, like people like Stephen Miller, the advisor to Trump, have advised? Do you see what I'm getting at, right? What is the real driver of these things is not so much ideologically, but demographic in many cases.
Interesting about Mandani, his support base is largely white. It's not the minorities that are voting for him. It is the wealthy, wildly educated white people who voted for him. It's all of the people that have gone to university. And what
Mm,
happens at university? You get ideologically radicalized. I mean, if we learned anything since October 7th, it is that especially our top tier universities are ideology factories. You can go in simple, wanting to learn, you come out with a keffiyeh wearing, Israel hating, like graffiti historical buildings radical activist. That's what you get.
mm,
So I don't know if his story, the story of Mindani, is the story of a changing demographic. That one I think is completely ideological. In terms of what's happening on the streets of London, and probably what's definitely happening in a few cities in the United States, but you can see it much more starkly in the
mm,
UK, is um, that you guys are getting bred out. They're breeding you out. They're breeding you out because London and the UK doesn't have a better story. I mean, the Muslims, I have a they've got a terrible story. They've got a backwards, woman-hating, civilizational destroying story, but it's strong, and they believe it, and that's what
mm,
they're teaching their children. And you can't combat that kind of a story with a non-story or a self-hating story. So you do have to have a better story. And you do see, I think, some glimmers of hope in that, and that even if you look in the UK, you do see much higher rates of church attendance and rejection of atheism among the Zoomers than the Boomers. You do see a bit of a resurgence in Christian faith and tradition. I mean, in the United States, especially, a resurgence of traditionalism among the Generation Z, as you call it. So I do think that the next generation coming up is recognizing that there is a vacuum, that all of the options that have been presented to them are largely meaningless, and they want meaning. So we just need to make sure that we are providing them with ideas and stories that are going to offer them genuine meaning, not just vacuous affirmation, but not just, I'm telling you to have self esteem,
mm,
that you will have self esteem when you do things that are esteemable. And everything that is esteemable involves self sacrifice. And
mm.
that's actually the thing that I think the next generation is hungry for.
But who are this next generation? Because I also think in some ways it's self-flattering to say that giving this incredibly Oxbridge style erudite speech from the podium will persuade the society, when really the kind of simpler and more kind of um, consequential policy would just be to say, let's reduce immigration dramatically, and try and like build a new, like mold a new people again with the best sort of virtues as well. And I just feel like sometimes people are it's an older style conservative politics, or one that's sort of 10 years out of date, pre kind of Trump, where it's just like we just need to sort of, we can have an open borders, an open country, have all these people different flood in, but we'll just evangelize them or convince them all one by one with better speeches from the pulpit. And if only we had better people who could give those speeches, type of thing, you know?
Well, it's now you're back to identity. Now you're back to
Mm,
story. Who are we?
mm,
Who are you as a nation? What is your national identity? And you're going to need something like that. That's the beginning. You don't begin with the question, what should we do about immigration? You begin with
mm,
the question, what is the UK? What is
mm,
America? Is it
mm,
just an idea? Is it actually a people? Is it something that has a racial component? Which, I
mm,
don't think that it does, but it does have a worldview component. It
mm,
does have a who are we component. And part of that probably does have to do with a connection to a specific land and probably to specific religious traditions as well, whether or not you personally believe it, recognizing that there is a root of the tree. And in the West, that root is Christianity.
mm.
So, I mean, before you can answer the question of what do we do with immigration, illegal or legal, you first have to figure out what your identity is.
Yeah. How has conservative politics in the United States changed in the last 10 years?
Uh, that's a really good question.
Well, I just know,
There's a lot of
reading through the book that you just launched, that
Mhm,
Pro-Child Politics,
mhm.
which I should have mentioned, why every cultural, economic, and national issue is a matter of justice for children. It was like a blend. There was the Grover Norquist's old, Reagan style guy, but then there was chapters in there which were much more MAGA, much more stuff that a George W. Bush wouldn't have agreed with. So you can sort of see this new hybrid emerging, which is different to what it was 10 years ago in the US, right?
So, how has conservatism changed? I think that the tent has gotten bigger because the left has gotten nuttier. And we're picking up a lot of people because they're looking at the Democrats going, you're crazy. I'm getting out of here. I mean, the approval and the budget for the Democrats has never been lower. Like,
Mm.
I have friends who have been lifelong Democrats. They're like, I'm going independent. I cannot be associated with you, even if my voter card is the only one that knows about it. Like there's a this right from the left, from the progressives. They have still got their hardcore base, and that hardcore base, unfortunately, does still control a lot of the institutions, especially media, entertainment, and academia. So, what has changed about conservatism? It has become more of a catch-all for people that are just connected to reality, biological reality, economic reality, historical reality, right? If you are in the world of reality, if you are touching grass, you're a conservative these days. But obviously, that makes for some challenges. I mean, we just saw it last week as it relates to the conflict between Israel and Iran. You had the isolationists that'll say no, conservatism is American first, and we just are not going to do any kind of intervention overseas. And then you still have conservatives that are like, but America is the greatest force for the world. And if we don't get involved, then China will. So, I mean, it's great to have a large tent, but that does mean that there is actually a lot of ideological diversity within conservatism. There was an incredible graphic that was put out like 2 weeks ago, and it showed this dense little nexus, tight, tight blue of the agreement among progressives,
I
like
saw that, yeah.
the alignment. And then you looked at the spectrum over to conservatives, and it was this much larger, less cohesive, um, less dense network of people that consider themselves conservative and on the right. But we don't have a lot of agreement. We disagree about gay marriage and taxes and national security.
Mm,
We disagree about whether or not we disagree about immigration. Some people are a little more like, bring them in, we're going to assimilate. Some people are like, no, tightly control it. Some people are like just refugees that actually have a demonstrable need. So
mm,
they're all conservatives. You could see it when Trump came in and rewrote the GOP platform during
mm,
the missionaries. He removed the explicit reference to heterosexual marriage. He removed the aspirational language around pro-life laws,
Mm,
because he was appealing to a much broader base as it related especially to different social issues. So, it's a bigger tent. I also think that the rise of alternative media has really helped conservatives. I think we've always had better arguments. We've
mm.
always had better statistics when you're actually getting good data, but we have not had the same kind of access to get our ideas across. But now, with the demise of a lot of mainstream media, the rise of a lot of alternative media, and also the recognition from people like Zuckerberg and Bezos that the censorship thing was a mistake and sorry about that. Now, even on social media, and of course, with Elon Musk taking over X, now we can spread our ideas much more easily. And I think that is also bringing a lot more people to the conservative side.
Yeah, at some point, I mean, some of these things are good, right? There's a good debate between, and there has to be a happy medium between remaking the Middle East to look like Seattle, and not getting involved at all, and sort of abdicating responsibilities for the power and responsibilities, I suppose, as you have as the superpower, and immigration. You know, we've moved on from Jeb exclamation mark. Illegal immigration is an act of love to a lot harder type of approach globally, right? And there was that older George W. Bush right, was a little bit, in retrospect, dreamy and utopian, um, and and lacked the realism, I think, that sort of Trump in his style brought to the job. How socially conservative do you think is the Trump administration?
Trump is not, but
Mm,
he's got so many good people who are.
mm,
So many people that are surrounding him in his cabinet that he's made different appointments. I know some of them. And so honestly, like I don't obviously social conservatism is a really big deal to me because I'm like, you don't get
mm,
anything if you don't do life, family, religious liberty. If you do not do that, you get
mm,
nothing. You get nothing that you want. Like these are the core issues. There is a hierarchy of values here, and
mm,
life, family, and religious liberty, that is like at the nexus. So
mm.
he's not great on that. Well, religious liberty is probably fine, but um, the people in his cabinet are like a lot of them are very, very committed social conservatives who are all also happen to be very good at whatever job they're doing. Secretary of
Mm.
Transportation, and Pete Hegseth, and a lot of them are bringing their pro-life, pro-family, pro-child views into the administration.
Yeah, isn't though that i the impression I get is that they've looked back and saw this, George W. Bush try to re-evangelize the nation's style, and thought to myself, look, it's not doesn't seem to be working. So what we need to do is at least sort of focus on some of these other issues like immigration, trade, and the rest of it, to help you know, rebound the nation. And that, hopefully, the upshot of that will be, you know, more secure families. There'll be the byproducts of that will be better, almost in a way, than the alternative, the previous approach, which was tried. I mean, I feel like that's a kind of quite a reasonable argument, and one that is, well, I think is a sort of more Disraelian conservatism rather than a kind of Gladstonian liberalism, which is the difference, because Gladstone was very much, giving lectures to people and the rest of it. But it may not turn out, it may not work. But I sort of feel that's the sense I get from the Trump administration, that's the approach that they're trying. But you're closer to it. What do you think?
I think that both Trump and the people in his administration and conservatives in general are much more connected to the normies, just the ordinary people. Like I said, the ones that are touching grass, the people that actually have to go to work at jobs that don't involve a computer, the ones with, name tags on their shirt when they go to work. And like when you're connected to them, you actually see that all of these somewhat like naive and like, Jeb Bush era, I mean, even George Bush era,
Mm,
like these policies are hurting the common man. They
mm,
hurt the common man. Like a bad economy, immigration is bad for the lowest paid jobs.
yeah,
They're seeing that um, the poor are struggling to get married. Like, there's actually a major marriage divide in the country, and it is between the elite and the
mm,
poor. Like, the elite are still getting married and staying married. The poor are struggling to get married and failing to stay married. I mean, they're seeing higher rates. I mean, JD Vance has lived this. He sees how small towns have been ravaged by drugs and because their economies have been hollowed out because their jobs have gone overseas. So it's like they are so much more in touch with the normies, whereas
mm.
the Democrats are almost all wealthy, college educated elites, and they're out of touch. And that's why their ideas don't work because they're not connected to reality. So conservatives, even though I have qualms with some of President Bush's, specifically his social priorities and social leanings, they're so much more in touch with the real
Mm,
Americans who are really hurt by bad policy, whether it's national policy, immigration policy, energy policy, environmental policy,
mm,
minimum wage laws, rent controls. I mean, whatever it is, like it's the normal people that suffer.
mm,
The normal people that suffer when you defund the police.
mm.
And so those are the people that are involved in your movement. You're going to have better ideas because you're going to understand the real price of getting the ideas wrong.
Yeah. I find that people like yourself and, Peachy Keenan and others who live on the
Oh,
West Coast,
yeah.
they've kind of been, steel has been sort of tested in fire because you really are dealing with some of the most, socially liberal parts probably of the world, right? And you're in Seattle,
And
right?
yeah, and everyone, I travel around the country, I travel around the world, and people are like, "Oh, where are you from in the US?" And I'm like, "Seattle." And they're just like, they can't believe it. They're like, "How? And
Mm,
you and you've got children there. How?"
mm,
I mean, like, they can't believe, and then I run this nonprofit that triggers everybody. I mean, it goes after, like, the ultimate progressive God is,
mm.
what my nonprofit
Yeah.
challenges targets, and so it's very traumatic for people when they hear what I do here. Um, but the answer is that, like, when you are like you said, like, a hostile culture either will grind you down to nothing or it will sharpen you to the point where you are so good at what you do, you're so clear on what you believe, your tactics are so honed that when you do get out and speak or write or have to make an argument, like, it's not your first rodeo. Like, my kids have largely gone to public school here in Seattle,
Mm.
and I'll tell you, you come at them with your pronouns, they're gonna take care of that. My
Yeah,
kids
right.
know they know what they believe, they know how to argue, they know how to spot a lie, they know how to push back without triggering, they know how to push back and trigger when necessary. So, there is something about being in a hostile culture that forces you to kind of be at your best.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Melbourne probably gives a close run to Seattle, but I feel like Seattle is still the kind of mecca for in many ways how bad things can get. And you
Yeah.
wrote a book on, or helped write a book on how to raise kids in that kind of woke
Mhm.
city. What's the sort of the short sort of 3 or 4 point summary on that one?
Yeah, Stacey Manning and I co-authored that book, and number 1, it's really funny. Like, if you read it, you're just gonna laugh all the way through because Stacey's hilarious. And also, like, we tell all kinds of stories about the madness of raising kids in a city where
Oh, yeah.
everything is lying to them, the teachers are lying, their friends are lying. Hopefully not your church, but sometimes the church is gonna lie to your kids too. The social media is lying, so, like, what do you do? You're, like, up against the wall, you're completely cornered, and the answer is you train your children to be warriors from the time they can talk. And so we kind of lay out that a sort of an age appropriate pathway for
Mm,
how and when to expose children to the damaging and destructive ideas that are going to come at them, how to establish yourself as the expert in the mind of your children so they always come to you for more information and not their teacher or their friends or the internet or
mm,
ChatGPT, how to make sure that they understand which issues they need to be fighting on, how to expose them to the good and the true and the beautiful,
mm,
in the sort of sheltering phase, but then when to expose them to the distortions in that we call the equipping phase, and then when to lean out and let your kids figure it out themselves.
mm,
So, between us, we've got 7 kids. They're now 22, 21, 2 19-year-olds, a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 13-year-old,
mm,
and they're awesome. They're
mm,
awesome. I mean, maybe one of them is going to take a very serious left turn and end up voting for, a socialist New York mayoral candidate, but I just am not seeing it. Um, like, they are pretty grounded in their world. They're not just okay, so here's the thing. They're not
mm,
just solid in what they believe, they're happy.
mm,
And they like being with us, and we like being with them. And, like, I swear, when I'm not, like, campaigning and crusading on behalf of children, I
mm,
just wanna tell everybody that teenagers are wonderful,
mm.
and motherhood is wonderful. And, like, getting to your kids and training them well and building a wonderful relationship with them, it's just endless joy and delight and hilarious Instagram reels sent back and forth at all hours of the night. Like, it's wonderful. So, you can get all of that in book number 2.
Yeah, no, I'm halfway through that one, but you've read a lot. I have to read a bit. I do think there's something to be said for um, being able to mix it with the left in a very media savvy way. To you can pick up and toy with their language. That I mentioned before, but Peachy Keenan's domestic extreme book, which I know she contributed to, she is definitely on song, and you can sell that to a wide audience of people that maybe are instinctively hostile to anything that you know that is socially conservative labeled. Um, but have you actually had in Seattle? When do you, as I often say to people, when do you stop being on the outside throwing rocks at the castle, and when do you, what are the likelihood you actually one day start to kind of reclaim the commanding heights of the culture and the government?
Well, part of the problem is a lot of our freedom fighters have left the state for freedom states.
Yeah.
So I feel like every day, every week, every year, our numbers dwindle because the hostility gets to you, or the taxes get to you, or the lack of parking downtown gets to you, or the freeway shutdowns for the Free Palestine movement gets to you, and you're just like, "You know what? I'm getting out of here." And so every year we have fewer and fewer people that are available to fight. But then also over the last year or 2, um, we've made some converts. Like, the thing about the left is they are so unhinged that
Mm,
even normal people are like, "This is crazy." So, we've got people in our church. We've baptized several people, adults recently, who
mm,
5 years ago were hardcore leftists, but things like COVID radicalized them. Things like hearing what their children were learning in school radicalized them. Um, the homeless explosion here said, "Wait a second, I am voting for this. What is going on?" And it's actually very interesting because I think that pastors here, and actually I think pastors largely in the evangelical space, had this idea that if they softened their message, if they made it really welcoming, we want to be able to appeal to seekers. And in our world, seekers are progressives, seekers are leftists, seekers are people that identify as LGBTQ, seekers are those that racial justice is the most important thing. And so we softened and we shaped our presentation of the gospel, for example, to be appealing to a more leftist audience. And it didn't produce an awful lot of fruit. We thought, like, if we can change the message, then we can kinda capture these people. But what's been amazing is the rise of MAGA, and after the election of Trump, what we've seen is people have moved towards conservatism, like we talked about, for a variety of different reasons. They have
mm,
moved into the conservative camp, and then those people are the ones that are curious about church. So we thought, okay, first we're going to kind of evangelize people, and then maybe their politics will change or their worldview change. But it turns out people's politics changed, their worldview changed, and then they wanted to consider Christ. Then they were open to the gospel. And so we had it wrong. We had it wrong. We
mm,
thought we need to change our message to appeal to the progressives, when the truth is the seekers are the ones that are coming into the fold through the political right. And they're ripe for the picking. They're ripe for the picking because a lot of these people recognized the insanity of the left. They needed answers. They found it in political conservatives, and all those political conservatives happen to love their church.
Yeah, in the US. This is a personal question. I mean, you engaged in so many of these battles, and uh, when you are, I also speak from personal experience, you do sometimes lose friends as a result of that. And I find it's just sad because you get on with them in a lot of other ways, and if they're gay, straight, whatever, right? And most of the time, I find at least it's them ditching, you
Mhm.
know, because you're suddenly a horrible
Right,
Mandarin speaking, raised by lesbian bigot.
right.
Um, but how do you? Is there a way of repairing friendships you found?
There is a cost
Mm,
to speaking up. I would say a cost for speaking up, especially on behalf of children, because,
mm,
like I said, if you are speaking up for children's right to life and right to their mother and father, you will be confronting not just the greatest political god of the left, but a lot of people's personal gods as well, whether or not they want to admit it. I mean, that means saying when your friend is like, gosh, I'm just so tired of my husband. I feel like he doesn't do any of the housework. I kind of just want to get out of this marriage. Well, that's where you go, okay, but that just means that your 3 children have a 60% increased chance of incarceration, a 45% increased chance of being a teen parent, and a 40% chance of an early death. So
mm,
choose. I mean, are you gonna sacrifice? Because it is a sacrifice, you're gonna need to work through, or do they sacrifice for you? I mean, that's unpopular. You could lose a
mm,
friend. But as my friends at the Colson Center for Worldview, they talk about how, especially in the workplace, especially when, like, DEI was on the rise and you had to, like, share your pronouns and maybe you had to march in the gay pride the company's float on the gay pride parade or something. They said you probably need to develop a theology of getting fired. Like, what is it that would have to happen at your workplace where you'd say, "I can no longer just be a good employee. I have to resist or I have to leave." And I do think that we probably also need to have a theology of losing friends. Like, what is it that would happen in this relationship that I would say, "I can let this go"? And what I mean by that is God loves unity. He loves unity. He prays for unity, especially among his people. He loves the people that we disagree with, whether they identify as LGBTQ, whether they've got the Black Lives Matter square going on, uh,
mm,
whether they are Jew hating anti Semites. I mean, God loves all of these
mm,
people.
mm,
And so we should not unnecessarily trigger. And I don't think we should be the ones to leave, but we need to plant our feet firmly. And then we need to have a theology of losing friends. What
mm,
is it that I am willing to just absorb? Because a lot of times, all of us know a lot of those friends, they come at us, they've got opinions we don't like, they send us Facebook messages or links that we disagree with. How much of it do we just say, thanks for sharing with me? I always want to hear your thoughts. And when
mm.
do we say,
What about repairing the friendships that have lost? Because I understand what you're saying. Like I said, I often think it's not the conservative-minded types that ditch the friendships in many ways. It's you. They decide that you're
well,
too.
they've measured it. Progressives are much more likely to
Yeah,
unfriend
for
conservatives
sure,
are. Like
100%.
2 to
Yeah,
1, I think.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But um, do they just people come back eventually, or do you just there's not much you can kind of do, or I mean, I'm just because I know you will have experience of this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm,
I think that the verse in Romans chapter 12, verse 18 that says, "Inasmuch as it depends on you, live at peace with all men." So if there is something that you have done that has created a rift in the relationship, recognize it, repent, apologize, and restore it. But failing to bend on your convictions is not something that you can apologize for. And
mm,
typically, that is why the relationship broke down. Hopefully, that's why the relationship broke down because you said, I am going to stand on these principles. I am not going to bend on these principles. My religious convictions and my political convictions, which, if they are well formed, are an extension of my religious convictions. I believe these things not just because it honors God, but because it is good for the world, especially the most vulnerable. So I would be sinning against God if I were to change, if I were to compromise, if I were to even move 1 inch from this place on which I stand. I can't move.
mm,
You are
yeah,
too frustrated if you want me to move and you say we can't have a friendship unless I take a step to the left, or take a step back. I am not moving, and it is your
mm,
choice to leave if you want.
mm,
So to me, that's my theology of losing
mm.
friends.
Mm.
Like, that
Yeah.
is where I say, if you wanna walk away because I am refusing to compromise, that is an acceptable reason for me to lose a relationship. Not because I'm walking away, they are choosing to walk away from where I firmly planted. But maybe you did do something. Maybe you were just too aggressive or too in their face. Maybe instead of having that social media conversation on your own page, you're constantly going to their page and, like, hoping and prodding. Well,
Yeah.
then
No.
apologize. Then in
Mm,
as much as it depends on you,
mm,
make it right with them.
sure. What about, I mean, so same-sex marriage is the issue that where you initially came to prominence, at least in Australia. That was enacted here in 2017 now. Do you think there's any realistic possibility that that the mood will change and there will be a change in the law on that? I mean, it seems to me
Only if we
un
change.
unlikely, yeah, but
Only if we make it change. It
mm,
it will either we will change it or children will continue to be victimized. Marriage inflicted an in Gay marriage inflicted an injustice against children.
mm,
It equated 2 things that for children are never equal. 2 men at the head of a home is never equal to a child's own mother and father at the head of a home. And I haven't studied it as closely in Australia, but in America, Obergefell and gay marriage set off a chain reaction that has steadily undone children's right and claim to their own mother and father and rendered them as legal and functional accessories to whatever
mm.
adults have the money and means to acquire them. It has
What what
shifted.
what about, because I think if there weren't the capacity to adopt or have children as in a gay, relationship, which I don't think people actually fully understood would be the case when they were voting for or, having gay marriage enacted, would there be as much? Would you be a little more at ease with that, or could there be a law which restricts the ability um, of same-sex partners to create children
Yeah,
of their own?
it was called civil unions, and they didn't want
Mm.
it. A lot
Yeah.
of conservatives were willing to say, "Oh, you want tax benefits? You wanna be able to visit each other in the hospital? Like,
Mm,
you wanna share property? Yeah, fine. Civil unions." Well, like, that's totally fine with us, they said, "No, no.
mm,
We want marriage." Right, separate is equal, separate is unequal. So, like, full equality. Well, marriage doesn't operate in isolation in the legal world. It is directly connected to parenthood laws, to birth certificates, to adoption law. It is directed to the connected to the definition of parenthood. And instead of children being the sun in that solar system, children's rights, their needs, their well-being being at the center, the thing that organized all of those other elements of the cosmos, they took children out of the middle and they put in adult sexual identity. And now the cosmos have had to reorder around what adults want in the name of non discrimination.
mm.
And part of that constellation is children because marriage and parenthood is and always has been fundamentally connected. So, are things going to change? Well, by the time this interview comes out, you can go to endobergefell.com and you can sign up for updates on what a coalition of child defenders is
Mm,
beginning to work on. And
mm.
it quite simply is a challenge to gay marriage on the grounds that it victimizes children because it does. So, are we going to be successful? Well, if we're not, society is going to collapse. I guess that's the only way I can put it.
I'll put all the links to the various things that you're involved with in the show notes, obviously. Um, yeah, is that the number one priority at the moment, Katie, or what? What are you're in Australia recently, or where are you going now?
Uh, there's like 12 number one priorities. I think I did 50 interviews last year on IVF. And then depending on the week, surrogacy is a number one priority. Legally, we're constantly fighting this child commodifying act called the Uniform Parentage Act. So when we talk to our state level allies, it is always to open their eyes to how redefining parenthood threatens children in ways that we really haven't seen.
Is that a state law, or is that a federal law?
It is an effort to uniformly redefine parenthood. so that you can acquire a child that's not biologically related and where you have not gone through an adoption process. In essence, you pay for them and you get them. It's it's baby buying in the name of equality. So we spend a lot of time on social media just communicating child-centric ideas. I do Instagram reels. Most of them are about divorce because there's an Instagram culture in divorce where women are encouraging other women to leave their good husbands because, like, Mr. Right is actually out there and your husband, he doesn't really understand you. And split custody is actually pretty great because you get 3 days all to yourself to read whatever books you want. So I there's no there's no one thing, but the gay marriage, Thursday of this week is the 10th anniversary of gay marriage, and to date, there hasn't been any credible, or I would say compelling, there hasn't even been any challenge put up. There's been a few states that have said, "We object to this because it's a states' rights issue." But nobody has, unlike Roe versus Wade, nobody has started to create some kind of, counterforce to
Mm.
legalized gay marriage. So, if I have my
Yeah.
way, it's gonna be like
It's
that
a
for
it's a it's a tricky one, unlike the sort of, Roe v. Wade and other things. It's because I think that, I I do consider it progress, that people are nicer to, those who are, than they once were, right? And I think people equate the 2 things. Gay if you're against gay marriage, then you must be, you know, gay hating bigot and the rest of it. And that was the successful way in which that argument was prosecuted, and people weren't interested in going into thinking through the full ramifications because it was, the universe and the different components. I mean, it was just a bit, um,
because the gay marriage camp decided that gay adults were the victims,
yeah,
right? Because they set the narrative, and they humanized those victims by the hundreds of pieces. I knew when I was young that I was gay, and I had to keep it to myself, and I thought I'm never gonna be able to have a family, and everybody hates me. And you know what? Those things are probably true. A lot of
mm,
gay people really did suffer in their early life,
yeah,
but the solution for adult suffering is not child victimization.
yeah,
Gay marriage is not some form of national therapy so that adults can feel better about themselves. So that's what we need to do. We need to properly educate people on the connection between redefinition of marriage and child victimization. And that is an easy case to make when you look at both the way the laws have changed and the way culture has changed.
yeah. Hey, Katie, I keep it to an hour. I really enjoyed, chatting to you. You're a bundle of energy there on the front lines in Seattle, and look, you were in Australia recently, and I know there's some additional media that's coming out as a result of that. But strength to your hand, and good luck, and look forward to catching up at some time in the future. Take it
Great.
easy.
Thanks for having
Yeah.
me.
Bye. Cheers.